Hello and welcome to The Wire. This is a special interview that we are conducting with a reporter from the New York Times based in Israel, Ronen Bergman. Ronen and his colleague Mark Mazzetti are singularly responsible for bringing the Pegasus story back to the center stage of Indian politics, and I dare say in Israel and the United States, wherever the revelations that were contained in their story in the New York Times a few days ago have had the maximum impact. Just to summarize what Ronen Bergman and Mark Mazzetti's story focused on, this was the result of a one-year investigation into the workings of an Israeli company called NSO, which many of our readers and viewers will know as the company that makes Pegasus. Pegasus is a spyware that The Wire and other colleagues, other media organizations around the world reported last year had been used against journalists, politicians, lawyers, etc., human rights defenders in a range of countries, including in India. And what Ronen and Mark's reporting has done is that it has filled in many of the blanks. It's added a lot of new information. And if I were to just highlight 4 or 5 of the big takeaways from that story, they would be the following. First, that the United States, despite having recently placed NSO on an entities or sanctions list, as it were, had actually toyed with buying Pegasus and its variants a few years ago. In fact, NSO had installed a trial version of Pegasus with the FBI. And more significantly, the FBI had also experimented with the use of Phantom, which is a version of Pegasus, if you will, that actually allows the interception of smartphones in the United States, something that the Pegasus system itself is not meant to do. The second big revelation in their story concerned how the United States government actually paid the government of Djibouti, which is in the Horn of Africa and a key US ally, to acquire and deploy Pegasus. This is something, again, that was not known at all. Another interesting tidbit was how Mohammed bin Sultan of Saudi Arabia had to personally intervene with Bibi Netanyahu when he was prime minister to turn the Pegasus tap back on after the whole Khashoggi assassination scandal. And the last big revelation, at least, and the biggest from India's point of view, the New York Times states for the first time in any concrete fashion that I've seen in any media report that Pegasus was sold to India in 2017 as part of a $2 billion arms deal between Israel and the Indian government. So joining me on this discussion is Ronen Bergman in Israel. Thank you so much, Ronen, for being with us and taking the time. It's rare for one journalist to interview another, but I think you guys had a great story and there's enormous interest in India. So let me begin by trying to get some more details on the big ticket revelation in your story as far as India is concerned, which is this the deal between India and Israel. You mentioned a figure, $2 billion, as being the overall value of a deal in which presumably Pegasus was embedded. Do you have any idea what the specific value of the Pegasus contract between Israel and India, or NSO India, might have been?
Yeah, but so first, thank you, and thank you for all the warm words and for the invitation. This is the first interview. We have received numerous requests from India, and you are the first and maybe the only that we'll do. Indeed, our story featuring on the cover of the New York Times magazine of next week issue, which was early posted online on Friday, created worldwide comments and follow-ups. And I think because of the spread, the proliferation of Pegasus to so many places, each country has its own issues or interests, whatever you call them, with Pegasus. So the Americans were very interested to know, to learn that the Pegasus was installed in New Jersey. The Israelis were very interested to learn that MBS was placing a phone call to Netanyahu to renew the license. Of course, India, with the relationship, let's say, close personal relationship between the leaders of India and the leaders of Israel, that gave birth to, I would say, a new generation of military expenditure, as well as new Indian stand, including international public stand towards Israel. Some of the details that are specified there comes from a very sensitive and long time dealing with sources, live sources, and therefore I'll be a little bit cagey in some of the details. But as you said, we have been working through a year in 12 different countries, speaking with intelligence officials, with leaders of law enforcement agencies, politicians, leaders, cyber experts, human rights activists, etc. And I think we get as close as possible to the full picture, if not the whole of the picture. Now, per your questions, I would say without, I need to check with how sensitive is the actual number, but I would say it's few dozens of millions.
Yes.
This is no of the 2 billion.
Yes.
The Pegasus in terms of real number is not the majority whatsoever. This is, there were like missiles that are far, far more expensive.
Exactly.
But from the point of view, as far as I understand, the point of view of India, this system being so unique, being so extraordinary, being so being a weapon system, a cyber weapon system that India cannot buy from anyone else, not just because no one else was ready to sell it to India, but because no one else has the system. Even in an ideal world, from the point of view of the Indian leadership, still there's no one else to buy it from, and therefore there was a specific interest and specific emphasis from the Indian leadership to the Israeli leadership to obtain that specific license.
Would you be able to shed some light on the level at which this might have been negotiated? We know, for example, that in the spring of 2017, before Prime Minister Narendra Modi makes his historic and landmark visit to Israel, the Indian National Security Advisor Ajit Doval visits Israel and has high-level discussions with his counterparts. And that happens, I think, in February, early March. And that's followed by Mr. Modi's visit in July. Of course, in April is when news is released about this $2 billion missile deal, which was described at the time by Israeli defense sources as, if I'm not mistaken, the largest ever single export contract in the history of the Israeli arms export business. So this was obviously relations are on the up and up, but the Pegasus part of it, would you have any sense as to the level at which this might have been negotiated?
Yeah, but again, I need to be a little bit cagey here, and I'm sorry for that, because this the content of those talks or the disclosure of the content of those talks can jeopardize or have a potentially risk sources. I can just say that in order for an intelligence agency to buy and then install Pegasus and have an online activation of the system, it needs to be handled by the top authorities in Israel. So the top authorities at the Ministry of Defense are to sign the license, and it can be done only with permission or without exercising veto of the foreign ministry. And it's usually done with the direct involvement of the Israeli Prime Minister and the National Security Advisor. Right. Afterwards, and we're talking about a private company, but yet afterwards, when the system is delivered, it has to be delivered. It's not a software to be given with some kind of Dropbox or a disk on key, a flash drive. The NSO engineers needs to be physically present on site to install the system, test it, and then from time to time to come and do the maintenance. And it needs to be, I would say, in sensitive cases, while the ongoing technical maintenance is done by NSO vis-a-vis, in this case, Indian Intelligence Service, which was the entity that purchased the Pegasus, the overall connection is also with the involvement of the agency in Israel that is in charge of running secret intelligence and political relationship, which is the Mossad. So this is a long comment on your answer, but to your question, but basically saying that all the different components of Israeli defense establishment and the Indian highest authority, but the Indian Intelligence Service has to be involved in the process.
And if we consider that Mr. Doval visited Israel February, March, then that would certainly point in his direction. Did you encounter in your reporting any inkling or any knowledge about the identity of the purchasing agency in India? I'm asking this because in our own reporting, when we examined at The Wire the various numbers that were on the database, leaked database, and in trying to see a pattern of who these likely targets were, we found a number of foreign diplomats and numbers in Pakistan on the one hand, and a whole bunch of domestic targets, including politicians, journalists, human rights defenders, and so on. And when we mapped that together with what Citizen Lab had said in one of its reports, that through examining servers used by NSO, they were able to figure out that there are two customers in India. One that mainly spies on domestic targets, and the other that spies on domestic and foreign targets. And we, of course, narrowed that down then to the Intelligence Bureau and the Research and Analysis Wing. But in your reporting, did you come across any identification of the entities in India that might have signed this contract or got access to Pegasus thanks to this deal?
The answer is yes, but again, maybe not prepared to those detailed answers. I didn't discuss the possibility of disclosing them because, as you see, the details as specified in our report were going through a very rigorous screening process of fact-checking on one hand and sources security on the other. So I need to check those details. Let me just say that in general, there were countries, like for example, the UAE, who did not, or Mexico, who did not satisfy with one machine. And because of their field security, and sometimes ego clashes between different organizations and authority clashes, they bought few machines that were completely separate from one another. So I would not take from consideration that your findings were correct, that there were different machines sold to different entities, and that they were indeed looking at different targets.
Right. Let
me just say that the way that the pricing of the machine that was sold to India works, it has a certain capacity, it has a bandwidth that is determined in advance.
And that's what you pay for.
Yes, and this is called a license. And it's not that the license given from the Ministry of Defense. The Ministry of Defense is giving a license to sell a Pegasus according to some kind of a breakdown of details and capabilities. But besides that, in the commercial negotiation between NSO and Indian entities or Indian agencies, it's very important to, and this has a significant impact on the pricing, different kinds of capabilities of the Pegasus. One of them, and most important per bandwidth capability, power and price, is how many licenses are sold. License is the ability to monitor one phone at a concurrent time.
Okay.
And this is sold in the Pegasus, as far as those who were sold to India, were, I think, between, I don't know, I don't remember what was the exact number, but it's between 10 and 50. So each one can, it depends on what was decided, can monitor between 10 phones up to 50 phones.
Simultaneously.
Okay. And if, for example, but this is not a billing done in retrospect. So this is like a license that was given in advance, paid in advance for 1 year contract. And then once you go above the quota, then the operator need to stop monitoring another phone. Right. So to fill in the quota. Yes.
Or they charge more, or does the license not have that flexibility?
No. As far as I understand, it's not something that can be changed. It's something that is paid in advance,
right,
and not billed in after the contract is done.
Right.
And so
perhaps a hardware limitation once the equipment is installed, maybe. Yeah. You said a 1 year contract. As per your understanding and what your sources have shared with you, the deal signed in 2017, I presume, was for a multi-year contract, or was it to be renewed every year?
I think it was, but again, this is something, those details I need to check. I think it was for multi-year with some kind of a renewal option every year and cancellation option.
Right.
The most important part of a contract is the ability of the NSO mothership, so the headquarters, to renew the techniques, vulnerabilities, 0 days that the system is using. A Pegasus or all those surveillance machines are not a code that was installed into them and it stayed as is because the dynamic of the market, the engineers of the different instant messaging companies and mobile phone companies are always finding patches to seal and block the vulnerabilities that NSO is using, and NSO is using new ones. So this is it's a dynamic process. And I think this is the secret that made NSO by far the most successful and the long living and the most effective company in the market. Their ability to maintain a huge team of what they call vulnerability researchers, which is a sort of a laundered euphemism for hackers, right, but very, very trained and sophisticated hackers, to have redundancy on the 0 days vulnerabilities that they can use if one of them is patched.
Right. In your reporting with Mark Mazzetti, Ronen, you talk about the Mexican example, that Mexico, in a way, in other words, Mexico and NSO were already in talks when NSO then turned to the Israeli government and got the Israeli government's approval, if my understanding is correct. And I guess some contracts work that way, where the company reaches out to potential customer governments and negotiates a deal and then goes to the MOD for permission. But in the case of India, is that also how things worked, or is it something that India came to?
Let me. Here's the case. I can elaborate a little bit more.
Yes.
When the negotiation with Mexico started, Israel MOD has no policy on export of cyber weapons, because this was a new market, because NSO was almost the first, if not the first, in Israel for sure, but worldwide, the first company offering such a product worldwide. Most countries never admitted even handling as a state as a state actor dealing with such weapons, not to say give them to private companies or allow private companies to market them. So NSO did something extraordinary and on the face of it, even damaging to the company. NSO came to the Ministry of Defense back then with a chairman of the board called Major General Avigdor Ben-Gal, who was hired as a heroic figure from the October 73 war. And he was hired, a veteran of the Israeli military, was hired to bring the company, that its founders and managers and engineers, very, very young, and didn't give the impression of being very serious. And suddenly, they are the ones who offering intelligence services worldwide a solution that nobody else can offer them. So he gave the legitimacy and the sort of the honorable appearance. So he came to the Ministry of Defense and said, "We are willing to put ourselves under the defense export regime of Israel, even though we don't have to." And afterwards, because he knew that they are going to put this up on NSO shortly. So afterwards, the Ministry of Defense in 2013, indeed, the license to Mexico was done retrospectively after they already negotiated. But after that, all negotiation, including with India, had to go through 2, maybe even 3 different licensing. One is to give NSO a general license to sell its product overseas. Second, a specific marketing license that is not just aimed per the country, but is aimed at the specific agency. So if, for example, NSO desires to show, not to sell, to show, to pitch Pegasus to the Indian Bureau of Intelligence, it needs to get a specific license from the Ministry of Defense to market, and not just that, but what exactly NSO is going to show them, the specific vulnerability, the specific 0 day. And after that, if the potential client shows desire to buy, then it needs to go back to the Ministry of Defense and get a selling license. Again, very, very specific. The selling license is also termed that the end user would sign an end user certificate that says that the end user takes upon himself. This is between the Israeli Ministry of Defense and the end user. So, for example, the Bureau of Intelligence, the Indian Bureau of Intelligence, saying that the Bureau of Intelligence is taking upon itself 3 main commitments. One is to use it only by itself, and if giving it to a third party, to get a prior written permission from the Israeli Ministry of Defense. Second, to use it only against terrorism and organized crime. When all of that signed, only then the license is executed and NSO can sell. And
the end user agreement is signed with the MOD, not with NSO, right? If I'm understood you correct.
Yeah, it's signed with the MOD, but technically what is usually happened, not necessarily, but usually it's taken from the by NSO representative. It's given to the end users, the head of the relevant intelligence agency, signed and then given back to NSO. Now, in the license itself between MOD and NSO, there are many other terms. So, for example, that the Pegasus cannot hit or attack Israeli numbers and American numbers. That there are many other. Yes. So this is by far more specific. The end user agreement is only 1 page.
Yeah.
Easy and very simple to understand, and was even modified recently. Has a little bit more terms, but it's saved in the safe of DECA. This is the agency, the Israeli Ministry of Defense, that in charge of defense export licenses.
Now, DECA and DECA's officials would presumably have been following the reporting that The Wire and others did as part of the Pegasus project. And we found through our analysis and investigation, something like 13 or 14 individuals in India, journalists, politicians, human rights defenders, lawyers, who had proven Pegasus infections on their phone. Either proven infections or, in a handful of cases, clear attempts at having tried to, attempts at loading Pegasus onto that. Would Decca not consider the presence of Pegasus on the phones of journalists and opposition politicians and human rights defenders a violation of the end-use agreement with India? Do you have any insight into how Decca views the fact that Pegasus was clearly used against journalists, for example?
Well, I assume, no, I know that even people of Decca read the papers and have read your findings and many other reports. And I can also assume that they are not nonchalant towards those. And of course, I have asked many times the spokesperson for the Ministry of Defense, speaking on behalf of Decca, what is your response? Mark Mazzani, my colleague, and myself, back in July, published a long report at the news pages of the New York Times about Saudi Arabia that received the first license, NSO receiving the first license to sell to Saudi Arabia in 2017. And then the license was terminated after the Khashoggi murder. But even before the Khashoggi murder, Saudi Arabia had a known record of abuses of human rights. There was no question what Saudi Arabia is. The license was terminated after the Khashoggi murder, but renewed under Israeli and some say the American pressure shortly afterwards. It was terminated by the Ministry of Defense in October 2020, just to be renewed after Benjamin Netanyahu received an angry phone call from MBS, as you quoted at the beginning, and ordered the Ministry of Defense, with the approval of the Foreign Ministry, I must add here, which was led by the blue and white party at that time. Meaning, it's not what I'm trying to say. It's not just about Netanyahu and his will. It's more than that. It's more severe than that.
Right.
And I said a few times, I said that to give a Pegasus to a country like Saudi Arabia, or for that sake, to give a Pegasus, the CIA managed, coordinated, and paid for a Pegasus to be given to Djibouti.
Okay.
The American Central Intelligence Agency. And so to give a Pegasus to Saudi Arabia or to Djibouti, and being shocked afterwards that this Pegasus, so countries with a known record of abuse of human rights, and being shocked afterwards that this Pegasus was used indeed to violate human rights. It is like a keeper, a zookeeper, a manager of a zoo who let the hungry lion out, and then when the lion ate someone, he said, oh, it's his fault. It's the lion's fault. Because what do you expect?
Yeah. Ronen, this brings me to my last question. In your story, as well as in other statements that we've seen from NSO in the aftermath of our reporting last year, there is an indication, although NSO denies having complete knowledge of how its clients use Pegasus, but there is an acknowledgement of NSO's ability post facto to examine whether the spyware was used as per the license terms. To what extent, how powerful is this power to review records? Do you have any sense of what kind of data NSO retains from its clients? Is it just metadata, or would they have more than metadata?
I have some journalists belong to the consortium and then the Pegasus project have tried and believe, and I think still believing, what was later not published because no one was able to prove it. And I believe because it's this part of the reporting, as sexy and as appealing and as even, as reasonable as it is, I don't believe it. I have no proof and no reporting. On the contrary, I have contradictive, numerous reporting and sources to indicate that the so-called myth that NSO has a backdoor to its clients, have an online transparency into everything the clients are doing. I even heard some testimonies as if there's like a huge war room in Herzliya where, NSO is able to see what every Pegasus is doing worldwide, and that the Mossad has a backdoor to the backdoor, so Israeli intelligence has an oversight of everything that NSO is doing. Now, it makes sense. And I can only understand people believing in that. But as far as I'm covering NSO, this is a 1 year, a year-long investigation, but I have been covering NSO since it was founded. And in fact, I even met its founder, Shalev Julio, when he just started the startup back in a renovated hen house in 2007. So I know that this group for a very long time, and I have nothing to support this claim. And I would say even more, the NSO group, the last thing they would want is to know what their clients are doing. Meaning it may be good for the product to improve it, but I assume that they would at least have some kind of prediction that some of those Pegasus are going to be used for wrong causes. So the last thing from their point of view would be like to know about that. But in any case, whatever they thought or didn't think, it's not my business. It's only what we have in our reporting. And our reporting suggests the following, that they do not have any kind of transparency into what the client is doing. However, each Pegasus has a log recording all the phone numbers that are being attacked, whether the attack was successful or not.
So a kind of metadata, right?
Metadata that is stored, but not just about a successful, but also about an unsuccessful attack. This is stored on the machine itself. If NSO is receiving a complaint or want to investigate something, this is like the private safe that you hire, that you rent in a bank. It needs to have like 2 keys. The client cannot access it without NSO, and NSO cannot access it without the client. If the client agrees, then it can open a channel for NSO or a physical access if NSO engineers needs to come, because some of the clients do not allow, fearing some backdoors or some kind of Israeli intelligence intrusion, they do not allow any kind of online connection between Tel Aviv or between Herzliya mothership to the Pegasus world where it's installed. So NSO can access the log and can see the numbers that were attacked or attempted attacks.
Through a dual key system. Huh?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
But if the client does not agree,
right,
or if the client, like in the case that we described in Panama, taking the machine and dump it to the ocean, then there's no resurrection. There's no backup for the law.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Where do you go from here now? I know you have tons of unanswered questions in your mind. Where does the Pegasus story go now?
I think that we answered most of the questions we want. The problem now is with the ability to flesh all of them out with sources sensitivities. I am curious to see what would happen in the US, which is the center of the happenings and the developments in the story. But it's not just about NSO. This story is not just about NSO. Because let's say that tomorrow NSO is bankrupt and is closing down. There would still be hundreds of potential clients that are keen, if not hungry, to have Pegasus or Pegasus alike. And some of them are bad actors with bad intentions, and some of them are good actors like police forces and law enforcement agencies in Western Europe that would say, what can we do now in order to get some more transparency into the communication of criminals and terrorists? And I would assume that the next thing would be a wave of rage and protest from those agencies towards the companies, the cell phone companies and the instant messaging companies in America for not allowing any kind of transparency of good actors into their channel of communication, a channel of communication that is safe haven for, journalists like us, okay, for human rights activists, for lawyers, but also for criminals. This is the problem that NSO was quick to take advantage and make billions of. But when NSO is gone, and NSO is on the verge of extinction now. But when NSO is gone, the problem would not go with it. One problem would go, which is the exploitation of NSO products by human rights abusers. But the other problem, the encrypted, the military-grade encrypted channels of communication, it's still with us.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think you've highlighted a key problem with the use of this kind of technology. A lot of it, of course, stems from, I would also say, the lack of transparency on the part of governments that are trying to use this kind of technology. After all, if they had been willing to play by the rules and be transparent and have some kind of a review process by which dangerous surveillance technology could be used in a proper way, perhaps none of the scandal would have erupted. But, well, thank you very much, Ronen Bergman. You've been very generous with your time. Once again, a great story, you and Mark Mazzetti. And I wish you all the luck in getting more information out. And at least at the India end, Pegasus promises to be with us in the headlines for some time to come, because we have...
maybe let me ask you a question. Yes, what do you think would be the next phase, the next stage in India now?
Well, things are happening at two levels. At the political level, the opposition is fighting with the government and trying to have a discussion in parliament. They're trying to move a privilege motion alleging that the government lied to parliament when they tried to deny having used Pegasus. But more seriously, at the judicial level, the Supreme Court last year had appointed a review committee. And the review committee is going through the motions of trying to answer a set of questions that the Chief Justice asked of it, including, did the government of India ever buy Pegasus? Did it use it? What were the laws that, under what authorization was it used? Who all were targeted? I myself, as you know, was one of those whose phones showed Pegasus, and I will be speaking before the technical committee on February the 2nd. So we hope that this committee will be able to do its work expeditiously and with the full cooperation of all concerned, so that we get to the truth of this matter, because the way in which Pegasus has been used in India against journalists, against opposition politicians, it really undermines the foundation of
civil society,
democracy and society, exactly. And so it's not something that any democratic country can take lightly, which is why there's enormous interest, not just among those whose phones were tapped or among journalists, but actually at a much wider level, because people connect the Pegasus scandal with the fact that democracy itself, as we know it, may well be imperiled. So that's where things stand. But thank you very much, Ronen, for joining us. And
thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Good luck.
Thank you.
ಹೆಚ್ಚಿನ ವಿಡಿಯೋಗಳಿಗೆ ಪ್ರತಿಧ್ವನಿ ಯೂಟ್ಯೂಬ್ ಚಾನೆಲ್ ಸಬ್ಸ್ಕ್ರೈಬ್ ಮಾಡಿ, ಬೆಲ್ ಐಕಾನ್ ಕ್ಲಿಕ್ ಮಾಡಿ.